Hello and welcome to the Gateway Ticketing webinar for quarter three, where we talk about some fall housekeeping tips. We're so glad you're with us today. The Q&A is open. We welcome questions at any time. We will do our best to save some time at the end of the presentation to answer a few of them. And without further ado, let me introduce myself. I'm Matt Steckel, Principal Solutions, and I will be your host for this hour. With me, I have two former Galaxy administrators and current teammates of mine. First, we have Katie Hull, who's a senior instructor on our Learning Solutions team. Katie, would you mind telling us a little bit about your life before Gateway?
Sure, yeah. So I was in the industry for 22 years before I came over here. I was a system administrator for about 10. And prior to that, I was an end user out in the operation for about another 7. So spent a lot of time with Galaxy and with Gateway prior to coming to this side, where now I have been the instructor for almost 3 years. So that's my journey here.
Thanks. We also have Tom Tregler, who's a technical support specialist on the managed service team. And Tom, would you mind talking about your background a little bit?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Tom Tregler here. Currently on, like Matt said, the managed services team. I've been with Gateway for 6 years. Prior to that, I spent most of my time in the non-for-profit space, working with zoos, aquariums, museums, and botanical garden, doing visitor services, membership, and Galaxy administration.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So it is fall. Fall starts on Sunday, which means falling leaves and children going back to school and everybody's favorite seasonal flavors. These don't mean fall to everybody. If they don't, it probably means you're not from the Northeast, where we define all the holidays. So you're welcome for that. Fall also means a time to get back into our cubicles, get back to our desks. The busy season of summer has largely come and gone. Maybe summer doesn't mean busy season for you. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about when you get control over your schedule. Again, what are some of the initiatives and what are some of our top tips from some of our former system administrators and current Gateway employees about how to use that period of time. So let's start with, as you gain control of your schedule, how would you spend some of your time? And Tom, let's start with you on that one.
Right. So for me, when we got into our slow season, I would go into auditing things. I would go into training. So for auditing, what we would do is we'd look at our users. We'd make sure that we're deactivating any seasonal users that came in, right? You want to make sure that Galaxy is clean. No one has access to it that shouldn't have access to it. So this was both inside Galaxy, and then outside of Galaxy, other different access they might have. The other things we would do was sort of deactivate, get rid of some of that seasonal configuration you might have put in place. You might have had some special PLUs, things like that you're just using for that season that don't need to be used anymore. So we can deactivate those, let them sit in the back and be used just for reporting. And also hardware. I would review all of the hardware that we had in place. I would actually take the Appendix B or Appendix A that everybody remembers from your maintenance renewal. I would look through all that hardware, make sure I still had it. If I had it, is in a working condition? Does it need to be repaired? Does it need to be replaced? Do I not have it anymore? Do I need it? Things like that. And then we think about training, right? So I would look at what the team members that may have had some gaps during the season, what we can get trained for them. If there were new modules, things like that we might want to start learning on, and then update documentation for training. So we may have started using something in the season, or we may have changed things during the season because we ran into the situation and we changed a little bit our business practices. So you want to update your documentation and make sure that's all up to date based on what you did during the season.
Thanks, Tom. And Katie, when you got to this time of year where it may slow down or you got a little bit of time, what are the kind of things that you would get into?
Yeah, so coming from the theme park industry, the busier the parks were, the slower our side of the house got because every concentration was out in the operation. So that made it a little bit easier that we had those peak times where we could kind of look at stuff. And so one of the first things we did was we kind of mapped out our year. So a lot of planning went in at that point in time. So even if it was just me and my leader and maybe not my full team at that point in time, but what does this look like? Where are those milestones that are coming up in the next 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, so we kind of can start to build runways out and really protect timeframes and build times and the things that we need. I would talk to my partners who also weren't busy if they weren't out in the operation. So our pricing partners and our finance partners and everybody to say like, hey, what are we trying to do over the next couple of months? Is there a significant initiative that's happening that we need to kind of plan for and buffer more time? Our web teams or our IT teams? Is there housekeeping that you're doing? To Tom's point, if people are cleaning up stuff and getting everything ready, how can we support that? And so really just kind of getting a feel for what is coming up in my short term and longer term for my team, but also where those immediate partners are going to be and what they need and how we can help kind of move around all of those chess pieces so that we're working together. The next thing, I'm a big fan of playing. So this is where you get to go and I've got some time. So I'm down in a sandbox and I'm trying out new things and I'm maybe experiencing new modules that maybe we have access to or things I haven't been able to test out or things that I've always wanted to try with the system or those quick fixes that you sometimes throw into the operation where you're like, there's got to be a better way. This is a great time to kind of get down into those weeds and operationally figure out how do we make this a little bit better or a little bit more efficient or a little less cumbersome. So it also keeps, to Tom's point about training, it keeps your knowledge up, it keeps your exploration up when it comes to those things. And then I am a big fan. If you've ever met me in person, I probably have shouted this across the room at you, but get thee into the operation. If you are a system administrator and you have not experienced what your end users go through, you are not doing yourself or them any favors. And that's just a very blunt statement. But you have to experience how they are interacting with what you are building for them. And so I think it's really, really important to go out there and experience it and not just stand back and watch it for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, but get into it. Spend a half a day. Spend a full day if you can selling tickets or taking tickets or out at your parking location or wherever makes sense to you. It does two things. It builds your relationship with those operators because they know that you care and you want to experience it. And it opens up your eyes to the tools that you think you're providing for them that may not be as helpful as you imagine that they are once you're in the system and you're dealing with guests right in front of you. So those are kind of my areas.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, getting into the operation is a huge part of it. And honestly, for me, coming to Gateway, and I have a technical background, never worked in an attraction, that is the biggest part, the biggest learning curve for me. Even today, having been here for over 10 years, just still learning how the operation works. So Katie's last point about playing, like any good administrator, we should not be playing in production. So let's talk to Katie and Tom about what are some of their best tips about building and maintaining a good test environment as we head in and we maybe look to do some new things heading into the fall or make some potential changes. So Tom, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the where and how of our test environment?
Sure. I've always loved having a really good, robust test environment. It's very important. So I've got some sort of tips and best practices here for your test environment. First one is easy, right? Like Gateway, we will give you 3 web stores. You'll get a production, a staging, and a sandbox web store. Use those. Create a separate environment for each of those, right? Production, that's where the magic happens, right? That's where you make your money. That's what every customer and visitor gets to see. Staging, that's really supposed to be a carbon copy of your production, but for you to go in and do some experimenting in, right? So staging is where you will make a couple of changes to text fields because the marketing team wants to see what this new wording would look like on the web store, right? Or make some changes to confirmation emails, make sure that when you send them out, they look how you expect the customer to see them. All of those things that you want to do in apples to apples with production and do your testing on there. Big part of staging too is going to be your web graphics team or your web graphics changes. Sorry. our web graphics team will always work in the staging environment. So whenever you submit a change for your web store that needs graphics, we will put that in staging. You will look at that, approve that, and then we move it over to production. So it's very important to have a good apples to apples there, because you could submit a theme request and maybe things are a little different. And then when that comes to production, it doesn't look the same. Then Sandbox is just that, right? That's where you play. That's where you get the latest version of Galaxy, because maybe there's a new module you want to test out, or there's a bug fix, or there's something that you want to play with, right? You want to play with the latest and greatest version. You put that in there and you play around with it. And I say, break it, right? Go in there, play as much as you want, get that thing so far away from production that you don't even know how to get back, because it's very easy to just hit the reset button and throw a new copy of your production database back on there and refresh everything. So, Sandbox, go as far as you want with it. Documentation wise too, right? So we brought up documentation earlier. When you have these environments, you should also refresh your training documentation around them. Any other user documentation that you need to do around them are very important going forward for upgrades and things like that. And your maintenance checklists are also really important when it comes to this too, right? So you want to make sure when you're copying things, for example, when you're copying your production environment over to staging, you've got that list of things that you need to do, right? We need to make sure the URLs change. We need to make sure we maybe lock out certain users, or if you're running any scripts to anonymize data that you don't want, customer information in staging, things like that. So those maintenance checklists are really important for that reason.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about, what we're testing against as far as the environment, as well as the people who are doing some of that testing? Because it shouldn't all be on the administrator.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the interesting things that Tom was just talking about is you have these multiple environments, right? And sometimes you may have different versions of that. But the truth is, depending on how you're set up as a system administrator or an IT team, you may have different areas that are interacting with those environments as well. And so one of the big things is really understanding kind of what data is in there. First and foremost, what's coming down. So is your staging environment truly a safe replication of your production environment, or are you truncating things? You may be truncating tables to make it smaller and more streamlined. You may be pulling out data. You may have a web graphics team in there changing some stuff. And so really understanding kind of what data you have in those environments will help you also understand if you're seeing variances or nuances as you start to test things. So something that goes very, very quickly, potentially in your sandbox where you don't have, a ticket records table or something like that, and it's not streamlining through things, may take a little bit longer if you have a larger version in a different environment. So just kind of make sure that so that you can account for it when you go to do testing or staging or anything like that, that you have those variances and then you understand why you're seeing what you're seeing, or you can explain the nuances potentially between that sandbox environment and your staging environment, and sometimes even between your staging environment and your production environment if there is something slightly different. In the same vein, who has access to these environments? So what other teams may be in there also trying to do some testing or some recalibration or some training or whatever might be happening in those lower environments as well? And what do they have access to? So what can they change? Is everybody in your lower environment a system admin, even if they're not a system admin in production, because they need to be able to mess with things? Do you have teams? I came from a larger site, and so in our world, we had a lot of teams that could be in there, and what they could do in our lowest environments may be different than what they could do in production. And so we needed to really understand who's in there, what needs, again, collaboration, right? Collaboration is a really big part. What do they need? How do we help them? And then what nuances are they changing in those environments so that when I need to test, I'm not stepping on them, they're not stepping on me, I'm not manipulating product or trying something new if they're going to come in tomorrow and try to test against it. And then they're like, you broke the whole environment. I'm like, yeah, but I did what Tom told me to do. Like, that's not the situation that we want to be in. So we just want to make sure who has access, what are their needs, let them know you're testing. You may need to put a freeze on an environment potentially if you're doing some pretty rigorous testing or something that's important. And so those communication tools and those teamwork tools become very, very powerful when you're in those lower environments too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So now that our test environment is in place, let's kind of walk through some practical ideas, right? And we kind of broke these into some categories about who we're doing some work for and how we can kind of think about how we can spend the time in Galaxy or how to organize the changes you would make a little different than we typically frame the conversation. So our very first tip comes from Katie, and it's really about doing something for your business as a whole. So Katie, why don't you talk through this one?
Yeah, so this is the biggest FOMO I have now that I'm on this side of the fence and I'm not a customer anymore. I will tell you, I didn't know Galaxy Vision was a thing, and it breaks my little user heart now. Because you can bring in gateway people like Tom, like Matt, who will come in and they will give you this independent review of your configuration. They will sit down. You will be able to do this. I think there's a variety of ways, and Matt and Tom, I'll lean on you if there's any specific questions about how a vision works, but basically they ask some questions and they're open-ended questions because they want all of the feedback and all of the information you can give them. And they're going to ask you to invite your key partners. So again, collaboration, you're going to hear me say it a billion times. So bring in your operators, bring in your finance team, bring in your IT partners if that's not also you, bring in revenue drivers or marketing or whoever, and everybody gets a seat at a table. And then you have this independent person from Gateway who says, hey, what's working? What's not working? What do you wish you could be doing that you're not doing? Is there something that's really difficult? What are you struggling with? And they're just going to be these questions. They're going to let you talk and they're going to take a lot of notes and they're going to do what they need to do. And then they're going to come back and they're going to give recommendations and review best practices with you and say, actually, you can do that. Did you know you have that ability today? Or let me help you think about how to attack that issue. I can't tell you the amount of times asking a hypothetical question to Matt Steckel or some of my other peers here now at Gateway really helped me ideate on what I needed to do in order to get some of the products out that I needed to build. And so it's just very helpful. They'll roadmap ideas, they'll help you with all of that. And then they can also help you maximize if you have tier hours, how do you use those to accomplish some of these goals? How do you use everything you have in the system to Tom's earlier point of am I even using that hardware? Do I even use that module? Did I know I had CRM plus? I don't know. Whatever that is, they can help say, actually, these are the things you have access to, and let's go ahead and put that into play for you. And here's a really great way of doing that. So it kind of helps you course correct while you're in motion and not waiting until you get so far off the map that you're raising your hand and being like, help, I don't know where I am and I don't know how to get back from that, right? And you can do these. I mean, ideally, in my dream world, I would say once a year, but I'm just the instructor. I don't know if I'm allowed to pitch that. So that's my thing. Just have that constant check-in with somebody who says, hey, why are you doing this? I think it can be really helpful. So I'm team Galaxy Vision all the time, and I never had one in my life.
Yeah, and I've done a number of them. I was just looking through some of the names on the calls, and I've been to your site or on the phone with you and done these. You know, you have the reports in your hands. One of the big things we get out of this is collaboration, right? Katie mentioned it. Just the chance to have some time with the different teams of the organization, make sure we're getting a 360 view. We want to know, the people who have input into how Galaxy gets configured, right? Whether that's the marketing team or the pricing team or the finance team, those who live the operation every day, and as well as those on the other end who are consuming all kind of the output of the system, down to analytics and reporting and those types of things. So it's a really good chance to kind of, get some not just use Galaxy day to day, but have some cohesive time around it, and make sure that they're heard and understood as we kind of go through Galaxy together. Thanks, Katie. So Tom, why don't you talk to us a little bit about doing something for our guests during this time of the year?
Right. So one of the things I feel you should take this time to do is gather feedback from your Galaxy users, right? And specifically the people who deal with your customers, your guests. find out what sort of pain points the operations team was having with guests, right? Could be scanning, could be, the way the printed home template is laid out. Call center, guest services, right? Ask them these questions too. Find out what kind of problems they have. Maybe someone from the call center, or from someone, if you have a separate like web store support team or an info desk email. Find out the things that they're getting. They might be getting a lot of questions that you could do one or two little tweaks within Galaxy to really make life easier for your guests, right? Just to help them along their path, make ticketing as easy as possible for them. It should be a thing that they don't even think about. They just do, and then they're in your attraction. So definitely talk through all your frontline staff. I want to go back a little bit on a point that Katie was making with vision, is that you could take these type of opportunities and do your own little mini visions yourself with these people. So when I was a customer, just to like give you a little example here, is when I was a customer quarterly, I used to meet with key players from all the departments that used Galaxy, right? And I was the system admin, so it would be membership, admissions, and guest services were separate, right? But they both used Galaxy. Education, it was kind of like continuing education, but they were like our lecture series and things like that. They were separate from education. Finance, right? Other people in IT. I would meet with them quarterly just to go through these things. We didn't wait until the end of the year until it got slower to do these. We would do it quarterly, and we would talk through some of the pain points that we were seeing. Maybe we just did a lecture the other night and we had immediate feedback from it that we could make better before the next lecture comes along, and we don't have to wait until it's not as busy to do these things. But definitely do those things with your within your organization.
Awesome. And Tom, if we were to get really specific about a couple guest-facing initiatives, things that we've seen trend in the work we've been doing with customers, across the Galaxy user base, what are a couple of those initiatives that we've seen that you would probably dive into if you were on the admin side?
Right. So a bunch of examples can come in as that feedback through maybe guest services, call center, right? Where they might find that some wording is a little heavy on the web store, right? Someone's unsure of how to get this ticket because there's a lot of text on the page and they're not sure which thing to buy, right? And again, to go back to collaboration, with one of Katie's favorite words here, you can then meet with the other teams that can come up with that, right? Your marketing team will be very important to you in these situations. You show them the web page in staging and say, this is what we plan on putting out there. And they can tell you if that wording is right. They can give you pointers. They can change that wording for you. So modifying, updating your web store or your theme, right? You could take this time to make sure that your theme still matches up nicely with what your regular, I'll call it corporate or organizational website looks like, right? So it seems like a nice smooth transition from the guest who's going from your site to your ticketing page. Other things you could do to make life easier for guests are digital delivery, right? So tickets that can be added to wallets like Apple and Google Wallet. We can now send tickets digitally from the point of sale right to someone's phone. So those things are definitely things that will make it easier for guests.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, those are really good suggestions. And we'll talk a little bit more about, if you're wondering about digital delivery and some of those other things, we will talk upgrades here in just a little bit, and that might be a good place to explore that. So Katie, why don't you talk us through some things that as we talk to teammates and maybe take the focus away from guests, right? And put it on like our internal, like do something for us, do something for your teammates beyond just the administration team. Why don't you talk a little bit about how that would work at your organization?
So I know this is going to shock approximately 0 of you, but collaboration is my favorite thing in an organization. And so by a show of hands, I know we've got quite a few of you on here, but how many of you as system administrators have tried to help a partner and they've come back and said, oh, that's been happening for forever, and you want to scream? Why? have you never told me? Right? We've been living with that for months or years, or that's always the way that it has happened. And you're like, no, I can fix that for you, right? And so that doesn't just happen with operations, although they are a big culprit of it. It also happens with your finance partners and your revenue partners and your marketing partners who have all just been, thank you, Natalie. Yes, all the yeses to that question, right? Um, and so what I learned in my too long career, because I'm very young and I started very young, um, was that I had to initiate the relationship building. As the system administrator, I learned very quickly that a lot of people are going to think I'm too busy or I don't have the time. And so they're just going to do what they need to do. And it's not purposeful. They're trying to get through their very busy day or their very busy time, and they just don't bring it up to us, right? Um, yes, Sarah, I tell them, tell me when something weird is happening. And you know what they do? They don't always tell you. And so going out and initiating those conversations and kind of saying, hey, I know we've all been real busy, but is there anything that's happening? Is there anything that's going on that you can go to them with? Opens that door. And the crazy things that you will discover that, like, button colors sometimes freak people out. And you're like, I could make that not green if it is bothering your people this much. Like, tell me what is happening. My report hasn't pulled this for 6 months. Please let me know that. We can fix it, right? And so just initiating those conversations, make them feel heard. It gets you the data you need so that you're not feeling frustrated. Like a specific PLU prints 4 copies of a receipt instead of 2. Yes, or no copies when they're expecting something. Like, y'all, we could do this for the rest of the chat, right? Like, here are all the fun things I learned by people not telling me what was happening. So just do that investigating and don't assume that it's just operations. So I'll give you an example. Matt, I know we're working with real life examples and I think we have it on the next slide. But in my world, one of the things that we discovered through our, actually through our internal fraud department, through our fraud department and then our ticket fulfillment team. So nobody that was speaking to guests at all at any point in time finally let us know that they were seeing some weird stuff happening with tickets. Probably about, I don't know, 4-6 months after it started. And so instead of getting us involved where we could help investigate what that was, they were like, this is weird. And so we went and we talked to them and we decided to encode our tickets. Now that doesn't always sound like something for your organization, but I like to think of encoding tickets as using that really secure password that your phone suggests to you. Use that strong password. Sometimes people will say it feels like overkill. Do I really need a 27-character password? Maybe. But here's what I know when you encode tickets. It protects your environment even if you don't have that problem currently. So it's going to make sure that you don't have a sequential visual ID. So your visual IDs are not predictable and therefore more prone to theft if people can get a hold of those visual IDs and increment them one at a time. It ensures that tickets are not copied. So you don't have that duplicate visual ID issue that some people will have, or that rollover issue that sometimes you'll hear about. It does definitely reduce the opportunity for fraud. And it provides security for guest portal interactions because they have to type that in every time. All of those things are true. It gives you reassurance that you know that those visual IDs are unique each time. And then I like this part that nobody tells you right off the bat is you can adjust your visual ID length. So you can have an internal length. You'll see in the example we have here, I think that's 7 digits and it goes up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. So you can vary it too, and you can do that by media definition. So you can have varying lengths that help make some of those numbers just internal to Galaxy and completely not available for guests to see. So it really is using a very strong password. Again, some people are like, we don't sell that many. That's fine. I do believe that it's something that just kind of, before you get into a situation where someone has cracked the code of your visual IDs, this is a very easy thing to go ahead and then go back to your partners and reassure them, hey, we've done this really cool thing. We have initiated encoded tickets. So now we don't even have to worry about if that's something we've got to keep an eye out for because they're not repetitive and they're not predictable. to our guests or to our internal partners, by the way, because they're not predictable to them either.
Yeah, and it does, make the servicing maybe a little tougher at times, right? Where a guest has 3 tickets, but again, we should be looking at some of our operation and looking up by transaction ID or order ID, or using some of those more collaborative or consolidated lookup methods that we're doing. The other thing is, if you do change this, we talked about documentation already, you will have to change your documentation. You will have to rethink how your operation interacts with your guests, and how you look up tickets and some of those other things. So this is a really big one. Again, it can help fraud. It can help, it can help your guests because people aren't stealing their tickets and a lot of other things. It can be, minor surgery to do this, but the buyback can be worth it, especially with the introduction of guest portals. So next, let's throw it back to Tom. And Tom, why don't you talk about doing something for yourself, having a little bit of self-love during this season, making your life as an administrator maybe a little easier.
Right. I see the hearts popping up already. Yes, self-love. You want to take care of your work self, right? You want to make sure that Galaxy is running smooth for you too, not just for your users. So, we can do a couple of things that will help you along with these, right? So catch up on some projects. I know I always had that project on the back burner, that thing that I always wanted to do that, if I went and added attributes, this is going to be a big one, but if I went and added attributes to all of my PLUs, what would that do to my life when I'm creating reports, right? What would that do to my life when I'm trying to identify a PLU when I need to make a change to every adult PLU? Needs the price to be increased by $1. Well, how do you identify every adult PLU? So some of these things are just things that, it's a little bit of work up front, but it will make your life easier down the line, especially in the middle of the season when you need to identify that quick, and now you've got to go and change 42 PLUs and you're not sure which 42 they are. Make yourself a wish list, right? So, and this wish list isn't just for things that you wish Galaxy would do, wouldn't do. This is a wish list for yourself as an admin, right? So do I need help with this thing, right? Do I need another resource to do this task with? Do I need to get education to someone else so that I'm doing less work and they're doing more work, right? Or more of your work. I just make everybody do all the work instead of you, but you know what I mean. A lot of times things fall on us because we're the only person that knows how to do it. So you want to spread that knowledge a little bit, bring other people into the fold for things like that. Essentially, you want to ask yourself, what would make my job easier in Galaxy, and put those things down, and then we can start working on that, right? So yeah, if you go to the next slide, you'll see I have some personal initiatives right on there. We can look to audit, just like we were talking about early on, where we're auditing and hiding some things and your seasonal stuff. We want to clean up and audit a lot of old configuration too, right? So we might have built this thing because that was the one way we needed to do it. We needed to work, and we built it that way 3 years ago. But we don't need to do it that way anymore, right? Like we have, I'll bring up attributes. We have attributes on items. We didn't have them when I was a customer. If I was a customer, I would have built my items completely differently if I had attributes. So that's one thing to take a step back and look at. What can I redo? What can I rebuild? What can I fix, right? To make things work better for me right now. Renaming things, right? So we may have called a ticket a child ticket for 20 years, and now we're going to call it a youth ticket. So you might have started changing that in places where the public can see it, but you probably have a mix of child and youth all over Galaxy. So going back and renaming some of that configuration to put it in line with your current, your current nomenclature, right? Your current line of thinking for things. And then looking at other modules that will, again, come back and help you, right? So finding out those modules that are used, seeing what you can do better with them, or seeing if there's another way to use them. So again, coming back to me and my example, when I was a customer, we had gotten group sales on the web right off the bat, but we didn't know what to use it for yet. We had it. We had it sitting for a little while. We weren't ready to get into that like reseller selling things at a discount to groups yet. So we took a step back, and I had a suggestion. I was like, wait a minute, we've got all of these handwritten and email requests coming in for comp tickets. Can we push those back onto the department heads and give them access to group sales on the web? They're the ones that are approving this anyway. So what we did was we gave the department head, well, we asked the department head who in their department should have access to this and who is allowed to put the requests in for each department. And we built group sales on the web where each department was its own customer. So they would go in, they would do all of their comp tickets. Our admissions department, like they loved it because someone could go in and do the comp ticket and then just send it to the person that needed it instead of calling up the ticket window saying, hey, I've got 3 VIPs coming today. I need you to print out 2 comps and put them in an envelope for them. And then they're going to pick them up at 2 o'clock. And then they don't show up until 4 o'clock. And, they've been sitting there. This way, it goes right to the person that needs it. They get it. They go right to the door. It makes life so much easier for them. Another thing you could do is using PhotoPass to create employee IDs, volunteer IDs, make them as passes in Galaxy, and now they can be used for entry into the facility, right? They can go right through your access control point with them. You count them, you know that they're there, and it makes life easier for them. So, yeah.
Could you
Yeah, and
use Guest
Tom,
Portal with them, Tom?
You could if you
A member
wanted to.
portal?
You
Yeah.
could
And
you could create that option where you give them some benefits, right? So maybe as an employee, I get 10 comp passes a year. I could put those comp passes as benefits, give my employees access to a member benefits portal, and I can go and print tickets for grandma. Grandma's going to be in town. She needs a couple of tickets to go visit the museum, zoo, whatever your facility is, and there you go.
Katie, I think you had something to add here as well.
yeah, I was just going to kind of build off of everything that Tom's saying, and I wanted to kind of take this in a slightly different direction. So we're Gateway, and we're here to tell you how to use and gain benefits from our software. But something else that I think is really important is that you guys are investing in yourselves and your teams at the same level. And so when we talk about personal initiatives, one of my favorite things as things slowed down was to go to my team members and say, hey, what are you struggling with? Hey, what do you wish you knew? Hey, where are you having imposter syndrome? Because again, by a show of hands, if you're a system administrator, how many of you feel like you don't know anything about Galaxy on any given day? Right? It happens all the time. I'm an instructor and I feel that way on a good Tuesday. So there are so many ways to use the system. There are so many ways to build things, and you think you have it and it seems straightforward, and then you go down a rabbit trail and all of a sudden you're like, I don't think I remember what a chart of account does. Like, it happens. And so just being able to go to your partners and your team members and say, hey, what are you struggling with? Let's practice that. Are there any initiatives you want to be a part of, either because it really excites you, or because you're curious about it, or because you're uncomfortable and you want the practice to get better at that skill? So I think it's investing in yourself, as well as all of these things that you can do to invest in the system at the same time. So that's a big thing, is just remember, like, we're always learning and Galaxy is always growing and changing. So there is never a point in time where anyone has the entire system mastered. And that's part of the beauty of why we all love it, and it keeps us on our toes. But I think we have to build space in our development process to say, hey, I need to invest in me a little bit, and we're going to get this new module, or I have attributes and we have them in these really safe places. Luke, I saw that in the chat, and Natalie, I saw you say, I think this is just an us thing. Nope, not just a you thing. probably a most people thing. And so just being able to say, hey, how are other people using this? Where else could this be benefit? Putting attributes on all of these things sounds scary. Let's do it. It'll be great. Just getting familiar with the system yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. That's a really good suggestion. I mean, if only there was a place where we could get together and talk about oh, who put this slide here? So the one last suggestion about doing something for yourself is attending UGM. Can I get some thumbs up and some hearts from those of you who have already registered? So the last suggestion is attending user group. We are in Atlanta this year, October 6th through the 10th. You can scan the QR code on the screen if you want to learn a little bit more, how you can come hang out with me and Katie and Tom for a week. There's going to be lots of other friends there, and we're going to talk about not just Galaxy, but a lot of aspects of attraction life. It's going to be a week full of interactions with fellow users, a chance to visit 3 awesome sites that use Galaxy currently, and a time of learning with people like the 3 of us, as well as a lot of our other teammates at Gateway. Tom, how many user groups have you been to, and what's your favorite part of user group?
So my favorite part of user group is it really is meeting with our customers. Even when I was a customer, I made it a point to sit with different people every day. You don't realize how much you learn from other people that are in very similar situations to you, right? You might think that I'm the admin, I'm at this little attraction that's maybe off the road a piece. We operate mostly for locals. We don't get a lot of tourists. We get a lot of families from the surrounding area. And then you realize, wait a minute, there's a couple of big guys here and they're all having the same problems as me with these things. And it's not just problems, right? It's creative ways to do a thing that your business wants to do. So we try to really put those at the forefront when we're thinking about planning these user groups and things like that. So definitely meeting with other customers. To go back to how many, I have to do a count, but in 2012 was my first one. I missed a few in the middle area, but 2012 was my first one.
And how about you, Katie? How many have you been to, and what's your favorite part of user group?
Yeah, so I did my count this morning, like a good instructor would. And so this is going to be my 10th. I will be into double digits this year. So I'm very excited. It's my 10th UGM anniversary. And it's similar to what Tom is saying, right? It's the relationships that you build. So when I was on the customer side, I will tell you, when I was first starting out, I went to one user group. I didn't speak to one person. I was terrified. I went and hid. I didn't know what to do. And I regret it now because the things that I could have learned at that user group, I didn't. I was so worried about being in this giant room with clearly 100 and so people who were so much smarter than me. And I got in my head about it. And so I didn't ask questions and I didn't benefit from it as much. And so the next year when I went back, I was really determined to sit and learn. And so I had my little book and I was in the front. I don't even think I talked to my partners that year. I was like, I can't be bothered. I'm here to learn. And so I made a friend that year. He's still a Gateway user to this day. And he's still one of my favorite people to do my wild brained ideas with. And we became friends, and he was on the customer side and I was on the customer side. And when we didn't feel like we had people who would quite get our business, I would call him and be like, hey, hypothetically, if you wanted to do this crazy thing, would you try it? And then he would make sure that I felt comfortable with the decisions, and then he would do the same. And so my first relationship with somebody who made me think about Galaxy differently was actually from another customer, and it came from user group. And so that carried on through the next 10 years. Tom and I were joking just last year, now that we're on this side, because now on this side, it's like a family reunion. Now I get to see all of my people who I've trained. I get to it's the best. We get to interact in ways that I don't necessarily get to do now that I'm not on the customer side the same way. And Tom and I were at the hotel one night last year, and I dragged him over, and I was with my old coworkers and everything. And he was like, this was really cool. I had never interacted with them before. We've been
Awesome.
both been going for 10 years. I was a customer. Tom and I never interacted as customers because we thought that our two worlds were too far apart, right? I came from the theme park industry. He came from the nonprofit. We don't speak each other's languages. We don't interact. And what we've learned being on this side, that if you guys hear us say anything about user group, is you are more alike than you are different. Whether it's in the nonprofit space, whether it's in like, these are the big ones and they just have time and money and energy that we don't have. You're more alike than you think. The things that are frustrating you are frustrating them. And so just build those relationships, because they will have walked through something you haven't yet. Tom could have been invaluable to me when I was on the customer side, but because our business model didn't match, we didn't coordinate. And now we're learning how similar our lives really were in these different spaces. So build those relationships.
Awesome. Yeah, and there's a lot in the chat about attributes and using them. We internally know a lot about the agenda. There are several sessions on this, right? We have one that Gateway's doing all about, finance and coming together at your organization and using attributes. We have a customer presentation about somebody who has changed in place and done that. So there will be quite a bit, but yeah, we would definitely encourage the community around that. Finally, let's talk about doing something for Galaxy. And so when we talk about doing something for Galaxy, what better could you do than upgrade, right? So the current maintenance release is 7.8.15.6. If you're planning to get something in your test bed now, that is our most up-to-date maintenance release. You can go to the knowledge base for more information about content for that and the improvements we've made in that version. With that said, let's let Katie and Tom and I kind of talk through the testing cycle and how we would proceed with an upgrade. So Katie, why don't you walk us through how you would define your upgrade as a starting point?
Yeah, so the most important thing to me is the timeline. So build yourself a timeline. And then you'll notice on the slide that I said, but lie to yourself. Please do lie to yourself, maybe lie to your partners, because most often people want the best case scenario, especially when it comes to upgrading. And so I think it's really important that you actually build for a worst case scenario. No one's going to get mad if you deliver something like early or on time. They get frustrated when it's late. And so always buffer. I lied to people. I told them I was lying to them, so I was an honest liar. I don't know if that works, but that's what I would do. And so then I had this really robust timeline that would say, hey, oh no, something failed. Well, great, I built in time for that. So we're still okay. We're still on target. So make sure you're really clean with that timeline. It will be your saving grace. Sorry guys, I'm having some technical issues. There we go. As far as users, again, know who's going to be involved in your testing. What do they need to do? Are they prepared? You need to have all your partners available, and you need to know when they're coming in and out. So think of it as a play or a ballet or whatever, and you're orchestrating all these things. And then finally, documentation. Please have a clear test plan so that everybody knows when they're supposed to be involved, so that you know when they're supposed to be involved, and you can hold them accountable in order to keep that timeline intact. And give people clear direction and expectation. And if you need to make up, I'm not advocating lying as a general thing. I'm just saying, when it comes to project delivery, buffer. Just want to make sure we're clear. In your human life, please don't lie to people. Okay.
All right. And then Tom, as we're talking about planning our upgrades, what are kind of some of the high points that we should hit as we're planning for that next upgrade from the system administrator side?
Right. So first off, lying to yourself, taking that out of the situation, you do want to provide timelines, right? But like Katie said, make them flexible, because we're all busy. We might not be able to get to our individual tasks in time, right? So that's sort of where the lie to yourself, build some flexibility when you're creating those milestones. Then you want to take those users you've identified when you're planning, give them real and legitimate tasks that are for their department. It's very important when testing that you have the right users testing the right pieces of Galaxy. I wouldn't give the membership person a task to check out all of the wording and verbiage on the web store, right? Not that they can't, but that's not the thing that they should be focusing on. They should be focusing on how a membership sells, are the benefits issuing right? Those types of things. Um, Make sure everybody is involved, right? So when you're planning out, make sure you get representation from every department that uses Galaxy. It's very important. Even though, like, one of my traits when I was at a location and I was in charge of Galaxy is I made sure that I knew how to do everything that all of the team members did in Galaxy. I could go into the box office and I could sell a ticket, right? I could go to the membership desk, I could sell a membership. I could go to the tour desk, I could sell a guided tour. Heck, when I was at the botanical garden, I could fill up, refuel a tram and drive it on a tour, right? Did I have to do those all the time? No. But what they do is they give you a little bit, but just a little bit of insight in what everybody does. But just because you can sell a membership doesn't mean you see the nuances that happen by selling 40, 50 memberships a day, right? You want the people who are really involved in selling those memberships to be the ones testing it. Same goes for operations, scanning, looking at the web store, group sales, all of those different aspects of Galaxy that you use. And then finally document that, right? So you've got the timeline, you've got the users. Now you need to give them a list of those milestones. You need to tell them, okay, here are the 5 pieces in Galaxy that you need to test, right? Like a really good really good documentation will take you a long way, because then you have it right there. You know the things that they've tested, you know what they didn't test, you know when um, your pieces are not being, your feedback doesn't come in, you know who to go to and get things like that. So those things, the planning part of this is really, really important, just as important as the next part.
All right, and with that, let's move to execution. So we've defined, we've planned, now we're executing, right? We're still talking about kind of the timeline, users, and documentation. So Katie, why don't you walk us through the execution timeline, specifically the use of pilot nodes?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of testing in lower environments, beating that system up, doing everything that you're ready to do, but it's going to do a very large to you, and I'm going to say to you version upgrade, because that depends on what you're upgrading. Smaller jumps, it doesn't necessarily have to be major releases, that you pilot them in production first. And so I like piloting at every that uses Galaxy. I believe that you should be piloting on nodes that are frequently used. It gives you the most time to shake out bugs and shake out issues. And the reason you don't just want to do it in one area is because if somebody is using that system differently, you need to run it through its paces there as well. So you can determine the time frame depending on what is in the version, but I would give it a few days to a couple weeks depending on what's going on, and pilot, and then you can slowly roll out. But you want to make sure that you're very clear on making sure that that version is not impacting your operation in a way that feels safe to those partners who have to adopt and buy into that version as well. The other thing that goes along with that is categorizing your findings in a consistent manner. So again, collaboration, documentation, we're kind of predictable at this point in time in what we're recommending, but having those orders that are very clear, whether that be coming from your partners or if you have someone on your team who can categorize those. You want a showstopper category. This is, we have to do an immediate rollback. This version isn't working for us for some reason. An urgent is, hey, we don't need to roll back, but this needs to be addressed pretty quickly. We need this to be fixed. So a need category is something that we had. So it's not necessarily breaking the operation, but the fix is something that is impacting, right? Like there's an efficiency issue or something like that for your operation. And then finally, those nice to have things. So this is inconvenient and I don't love it, but I can live with it. What that does is it helps you guys as a team who has to go through and look at all of that. It helps you figure out what needs to happen, but it also helps Gateway. Right. So when you're communicating with your customer service rep or your CSM or whoever you're working with at that point in time, it helps them know how to prioritize all of that stuff while they're doing that as well. So those are the two things I would say: consistency and test, 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 test.
And Tom, what about the users during execution?
Right. So if you've done your definitions, right? If you've defined everything, if you planned everything, then really the most important part now is to schedule things. So you want to make sure, especially if you're a smaller organization and you don't have 5, 10, 15 different test nodes around, you might have one or two test nodes. You want to make sure you're scheduling time for these users, right? And that might be actually scheduling time at that node. So so that's a really important part there, is to make sure that they've got that time scheduled at the node. And then take their feedback, right? Don't just have them fill out a couple of checkboxes and walk away. They might have feedback. They might tell you, oh, you know what? I This worked a little bit different, but it worked, right? So that might mean that you have to go and figure out why it worked a little different. Um, or pass that on to the next person, right? That might be a training thing for you. So
Cool. And then as we talk about documentation, as you're executing, pay attention to your test plans and documentation. Ensure they've been updated with any new product types you may offer, any new procedures that you and your teammates have worked through during the testing cycle, even policies internal to your organization that may have changed about how you interact with guests in the environment. Newer versions can also mean changes to screens. So be sure to look at those in your lower environments, update not only your test plans, but also your user documentation. And in the end, a good test plan should lead to good testing and a successful upgrade. Um, so with that, we're going to move to Q&A. I see there's already one in the chat, and Tom, I'll ask this one to you. When you're test planning and your user involvement and rollout, how did that differ when you went from a small upgrade, 7.8.15.1 to 7.8.15.2 versus a major upgrade like a 7.8.10 to a 7.8.15?
So we had our UAT scripts, right? I had a whole set of user acceptance testing scripts that I was using. I would do a run through on any version, whether it was a minor 7.8.10 to 7.8.10.1 to 7.8.10.6 or something like that, or a 7.8.10 to 7.8.15. Like for me, I treated them all equally in that I should go through and run all the same standard tests against them. The additional step that I would take when we were going on a major version change, right, like a 10 to a 15, is I would take a look at the what's new documentation. I would take a look at release notes that come out, and I would first look to see what are the things that are affecting me, right? For example, were there changes in group cells on the web? Then I would look into those before I assigned it out to the person who is going to do the UAT on group sales on the web. I'd say, hey, here's a note. I've taken a look at this. Can you also just within your own testing, test this extra thing?
Awesome. There's a question about pilot nodes. Katie's going to be answering that in the chat just for the sake of time. It's really just about, upgrading your database and a limited number of nodes, running with that for a little bit of time, but there'll be some more information about there. And thank you, Alan. Yeah, you can definitely run your upgrade script to allow for that mixed mode compatibility. As we're moving through here, if you have any questions about anything you've heard today, if there's any initiatives you want to move forward with, or ideas that we had that you'd like to talk a little bit more about, please reach out to your customer success manager. The email address is on the screen. If you have any questions about who that is, please feel free to reach out to one of us and we can direct you in that way. And then finally, stay tuned for details about our next webinar series, which will take place in Q4. If you'd like to participate or have an idea for the webinar series, please email marketing@gatewayticketing.com. Thank you so much for joining us in the webinar series on fall housekeeping tips and system upgrades, and have an awesome day. Thank you so much.